All right, so not only after procrastinating, but also having some some video issues because I don't know how, but somehow I turned my bit rate down on my recording, so it like everything that I was doing had way lower quality than what it should have been. It was all like weird blocky and just kind of would like lose frames and stuff at random intervals. So I figured it out from what I believe, and I just wanted to just finally get to doing these character discussion videos. And just as like a quick thing about that is I wasn't too sure what I wanted to do in the layout of it because I like the way that I do my chapter reviews. I like the kind of the presentation that it set up as well as I like to just kind of record it and put it out there. I don't really like to edit those because I want it to be as organic as possible. But for something like this, like a character discussion video, I want it to feel like it's very well planned, and obviously like this isn't going to be like movie quality, but I want it to feel like I've actually like have this prepared and ready to go. Like I wrote down stuff that I wanted to make sure that I talk about and whatnot, and I'm going to make sure and to edit in panels that back the points that I want to really kind of hammer in when it comes to this character. So I was like, well, I'll just use my WoW character and then have him sit somewhere where it's like he's telling you a story by a fire. And I don't know, I kind of like the idea. And plus, my guy looks kind of cool. I don't know. Comment below and tell me if you think my dude looks cool. But let's go into Makarov's character, because Makarov's whole existence within the series is kind of odd when you look at it from beginning to now. Because when he started out, we didn't know the full scale scope of like the idea of how powerful characters were overall. Like we didn't know anybody above Makarov until really we got to Hades. Zero was the only other like big guild master we had at the time. We had other wizard saints, but Makarov was still within a realm of possibilities of being, able to fight these guys. None of them seemed absurdly above them. Obviously later we found out that Makarov's not that big of a deal in the world, but early series it felt like it was. You thought that, oh, these wizard saints must be the strongest characters, and as far as you knew, Makarov was the strongest wizard saint, and we still don't know how, most of the wizard saints, but Makarov's position in, as like I said, that power level old guy dude. You have that trope in a lot of series. That's one of those tropes, like the tournament arc, everyone loves. Even if you literally can just have 10 shonen, it all can exist in one, and in each of them, and as long as they're badass, like people enjoy it. But Makarov, really, the last time he held that kind of aura to him, that presence, was the beginning of Sirius Island, because even though Hades dominated him, you still saw that Makarov was very powerful. You still saw that Makarov was definitely a force to be reckoned with, even at the time, and he's still stronger than most people within the planet of Fairy Tail. Most people in the world aren't Wizard Saint level. So Makarov's still pretty fairly strong, but it's not just the idea of there being more powerful people than him after that. It's kind of he lost that role, and he didn't really do a lot of fighting after that. Like, he didn't really do anything other than get the team together in the Arastian Sace arc. He didn't participate in Edelus. He was out most of Phantom Lord. He wasn't in Tower of Heaven. He was out most of Sirius Island. He didn't really compete in the Grand Magic Games. He didn't really he didn't really participate too much in Tartarus, as well as Alvarez. Like, Makarov, just a character that I think is super easily overlooked, and I can understand why. But if you kind of just look at specifically what he's saying in his panels, not just of, oh yeah, he's just given some old nugget of wisdom, really what he's saying and how it connects to other pieces of his life and his story that are really important. So let's get into Makarov and his whole thing right now, because I think his value really is in his character. I think he's way more of a character-driven individual within the story. So we're going to be going over 4 areas of character discussion in these. I'm going to do bio, just giving a brief summary. Brief summary. Summary is a category in here, but a bio. I'm just going to kind of TLDR their kind of origin, their background, and then abilities. Talk about whatever powers they have, the story influence, both like in where they present themselves to the people around them, but also to individual people of who they influenced and affected, as well as the summary. And the summary, I think, is going to be always the bigger things, because even characters that you don't have a lot for, like, bio or abilities, like, next I'm gonna do Yuri, like, after Makarov, I'm gonna do Yuri, Ivan, and Laxus. And I can do a good chunk about Yuri, but Ivan is going to be a weird one. But I think the summary for him is going to be more interesting because it's kind of it'll just be like a what happened thing. But anyway, let's go into the bio. X696. 10 years after Fairy Tail had been founded, one of the founding members, Makarov Dreyar, and his wife Rita, welcomed their son into the world. Born into the guild hall itself and named by Mavis the first guildmaster of Fairy Tail, Makarov was off to a unique start within the world. And hilariously enough, he was named after a kind king from a book that Mavis had read. And in Daedalus, there's the Faust, this crazy tyrannical king that later is revealed to actually be the Daedalus Makarov. It was always a really weird decision to reveal that, but I can kind of get it. And I'm wondering if Mishima had that idea of Makarov's name origins already in mind and then decided to kind of flip that to just do something that would make it way more of like a callback interest. Like, oh wow, this is kind of now a much weirder flip on this character. But this was also the start of Makarov's hardships. Due to Mavis's curse and Rita's exhausted state after giving birth to her son, she ended up dying. Makarov would grow up to not know his mother. He didn't have anyone to even be in that role because he has a kind of position for some of the people in the guild, almost like a fatherly role. And I know a lot of people seem to, see him more like a grandpa, but Urza herself has said that the only person she ever really seen as a parent was Makarov. So Makarov not having that kind of same substitute probably really just made him miss such an opportunity to help mend that dangerous wound at the start of his life. Because if Mavis was around, she would have likely raised him just the same as she would her own kid. Well, she knew about him. Anyway, I don't want to get too on that. And then 4 years later, Yuri dies. And now this is like a very important aspect to Makarov's character that I'll get to later, but I just wanted to really point out, like, that when you really think about it, even though he was 4 years old at the time, how many things do you remember at 4? So Makarov grew up without any parents. He was an only child. Like, his mother had just given birth to her first child and died. Yuri, as far as we know, didn't have any siblings. And Makarov had the guild, but I imagine there was always that just base idea of wishing that there was, somebody within his house to really have around him. And it doesn't get happier from there for him. Even further down the line, Makarov managed to have his own son named Ivan. Though due to him possessing information that could damage the guild and being a bit of a reckless and dangerous individual in of itself to the point that he was disliked even by guildarts, he was excommunicated from the guild. And Ivan is weird because we don't know too much about him, but the thing is, us as like the viewers don't know certain information, but people within the series do know. It's kind of like how we didn't really know anything about guildarts up until his introduction, but like if you jumped into the story, like you jumped into the world at chapter 50 or something, more than 100 chapters before guildarts' debut, and you asked them about guildarts, they would explain them to you because they know. It was just something that we hadn't gotten to that point in the story. But you have to keep in mind, though Ivan was a bad guy, like Makarov knew him probably as a good, happy child at some point. He could have been just somebody dark and vile from the start, but that's just something that you'd have to go out of your way to kind of assume. Kind of like we saw Laxus way that he was when he was a child, and then later in his life before everything, the fighting festival, like he just became this much darker, more aggressive guy. It's a bit of a saddened turn when you see like that happy and innocence turns such to like a malefic vision and way of life. Now, due to the events of the Battle for Fairy Tail, though, Makarov was forced also with excommunicating his own grandson, somebody he was still happy to have even after everything that was dangerous in his life. I mean, even though Laxus prior to that was a bit of a jerk, he wasn't vile. Like, he was an asshole, but it wasn't like he was, going out being like Ivan. Like, Ivan didn't care about his son at all. Like, he was perfectly fine just throwing his son aside, didn't give a care in the world to him. We know that that wasn't the case for Laxus. Laxus was just very confused. He had a lot of bottled up and warped emotions. But at the end of the day, what he did in that arc was, it was something that Makarov couldn't overlook. And it was something that he had to do for the sake of the guild. So this guy, saying that his grandson was the thing that he lived for. Seeing him happy. He said, I don't care if you're if you live strong or even if you're smart. I just want you to be happy. And having to excommunicate him. And at that point, Makarov, as far as he knew, he could have never seen Laxus again. Like, after excommunicating Ivan, he hadn't seen him again until the Grand Magic Games. And that was only because Ivan popped up. And Laxus was still young. He had a lot of potential. He just was very, he just had some misguided steps. And I imagine that for Makarov just had to be something that loomed on him for a long time. And it had to just be one of those massive stress nails that probably, like, further just pushed him near the edge. But now that we've gone through the base aspects of Makarov's personal pains and struggles, I'd like to jump into the next session and talk about his abilities a bit before we get into why the important events from the story are the notable aspects for Makarov. Why he, I believe, is a much better character than I think people give him credit for. But first, let's talk about the abilities and go into some of the fun stuff, talk about his magic and whatnot. The two largest aspects of Makarov's arsenal are his giant magic, which allows him to alter the sides of his body in various ways, such as elongating limbs, just kind of stretching them out to making them just outright very large and just powerful. And his normal size that we see him throughout most of the story, it's like 50 or so feet, I just guess. I can look into it, but I don't think it matters. But his maximum size that we see on Sirius Island, that I would imagine that if he wasn't so old and had, his heart problems, that he would be able to go to this size, like, regularly in fights. But I would assume where he's at now, going that size is probably very, like, it's a big strain on his body. But outside of that, because you don't really see, that thing is like a mile tall. Like picking up a person to him is probably like picking up an ant. And, you can even see, like, the fairy tale boat that they arrive in. It's like a toy to him. Like, he's just gigantic. There's only a couple characters in the series bigger than him, like Ikusa Tsunagi, Brandish, Alderaan, and whatnot. And the other major spell he has is Fairy Law, which is a spell that originates from the black magic spell Law. Now, that actually is a very dangerous spell because it casts, like, this judgment effect onto those that the user sees as an enemy, and the more people that it affects, the more life force it takes away from the caster. Now, keep that in mind, because that's going to be very important later. So Makarov's moveset is very simple, but it's very strong in execution, because it's like the difference between, like, super strength. If you said super strength, and it's like, oh, picking up a car or something that's very basic, versus, like, picking up a mountain or something. It's like, wow, you're taking it to, like, a good extra level of flex, my guy. But let's talk about the story influence over Makarov and what he's done to those both within the guild and to the, like, upholding the guild itself. I think is just a really important way to view Makarov, because, like I said, Makarov is a very character-driven person, but he's got both his own personal stuff going on that I imagine, again, very, very painful, but also how he helps those around him. Though he himself is, I imagine, struggling all the time when thinking about the hardships of his life, but not wanting other people to experience that as well. And there is a note with this that I will get to momentarily, but the three biggest things of Makarov's presence within the overall story hold a lot of weight. Each shown different parts of the series from different angles. It's not just, oh, we're going to show this once. Like, you get, like, a scene where it'll be him, like, the first thing I'm talking about is, like, him saving youth. And then you'll see it, like, when he talks to Kageyama, but also when he talks to Gachil. And it's really important to look at those two things and compare them of where he's presenting them to these two characters, but really why he's doing that and what he's saying. Like, what is his reasoning to this? Is he just giving big fancy words, or is he giving, wisdom from experience, or something that is going to help them lead into the future? Now, the first thing, like I said, saving youth. Though he's done a lot for characters like Natsu, Urza, and Laxus, the one I believe has the most telling of Makarov's vision of the guild, as well as his role within the guild as the guild master and the responsibility that comes with it, is no better of an example than with Gachio. Though Gachio was an antagonist upon his introduction, he was much more of a scummy criminal than an outright evil villain. He was sadistic, but he wasn't just murdering people. But he was on that pathway towards, becoming a unsavable person, so dark that it was like, you might as well either lock him up or kill him, kind of thing. But it wasn't entirely his fault, because we as the readers now know that Gachio wasn't a bad guy. He just grew up in a very bad environment. If you've read his spinoff, then you can understand that. And if you haven't read it, I would recommend it. Otherwise, wait until I do my Gachio video in the future. But Gachio's past as well as his future were something that he himself had to both look at and overcome, as well as figure out what he wants to do. Because though the past is the past, the future is always something new. It's something that he can decide. And Makarov offered that to him, because when he decided to invite Gachio to join the guild, it wasn't just getting a new member or getting a new employee, because at the end of it, the base root of it, the guild is a business, and the people within it are making money for the guild from the quests that they give them. That they contract with people seeking aid for whatever their problems are. Makarov just saw a young man teetering dangerously down a dark pathway. When Makarov offered Gachio a chance to join the guild, like I said, it wasn't even salvation for him. He wasn't even trying to be like, I'm going to offer you redemption for what you did, because it's not something that he really saw as what was going on. Because when Gachio even is trying to, like, get him to not do this, like, I imagine for him it was really weird. This guy that was your enemy not too long ago is now inviting you to join your guild, and he's like, hey, I destroyed your guys' guild. Why would you want me in there? And he's like, well, guilds can be rebuilt, like the buildings aren't what's important, and we already rebuilt it, so whatever. And on top of that, he's like, oh, well, I also hurt your friends, I hurt people in your guild. He's like, that's, though, is something that's unforgivable. And though that is the case, Makarov believed that it would be more unforgivable for himself to let that personal beef, let this young man slip down this darker pathway, to let somebody knowingly go down this way. He wanted to help him, and he just wanted to offer him a chance for the future, a chance to help guide, more of a way to forge his own path in a much more, like, plentifully well-structured environment. Something that would be beneficial and good for him, and not just him looking for whatever chance he can nearby. Like, instead of that more of scavenger criminal life, it would be putting him amongst people that actually cared about him, and putting him in a position to build a happier life, and to do it very strongly. The next thing, really, living with freedom. And I think that's a really strong thing, not only for Makarov as an individual, but it reflects the guild itself. At the start of the story, we were given a speech from Makarov shortly after his introduction, taking the bulk of drama, pestering, and just, issues from the Magic Council, so he could protect the members of the guild of their opportunity to live free and happy and choose their own pathways. This was further expanded upon during the conversation that followed the defeat of Hades on Sirius Island. At some point during his journey, Preach Galepool gazed upon the abyss of magic, coming to the belief that magic originated from within darkness, and thusly magic is darkness. Makarov's response was very, very telling, again, of how he sees everything, of how he sees people, how he sees life, and how he sees the guild. he accepted it. He said, if that's true, then fine. He said, magic can be dark, it could be light, it could be red, it could be blue. It doesn't matter. Magic changes with the people, it changes with the times, with the eras, and it grows alongside them, even believing that it is essentially alive with us. Fairy Tail lives with the same freedom, driving home to Hades that this idea of magic and life was something that he taught him, something he learned from his guildmaster growing up, and something that had been, in the structure of the guild since it was founded by Mavis, Yuri, Preach, and Warren. Leaving his old guildmaster completely speechless. Like, that had to be something for him that had just been, like, just remembering everything all the way back to, when he formed the guild with Mavis and everybody. And I would assume that understanding of magic and that belief of what it is and what it's for, probably really rattled the, like, very dark cultist belief that he came up with during his journey and his pathway of magic. Now, the last aspect of this I want to talk about is why I think Preach chose Makarov as successor. Obviously being Preach scalable before he took on the name Hades and whatnot. It's always distincted in, Preach before he went down that pathway, Hades being the darker way of him. But what he had taught Makarov really had stuck with him. Even in the face of the guy who taught this to him that had changed his perspectives, he said, no, I'm still sticking with this. The way that Fairy Tail began from Mavis, that Hades had cast aside, lived strong within Makarov. Now, these lessons and beliefs weren't the only things that were taught to Makarov. During Chapter 40 of 100 Years Quest, we were presented with a very telling scene of Makarov in his youth, prior to being declared as the third Guildmaster of Fairy Tail, that I think was the driving factor for Preach to choose him as his successor. For some context on what I mean by this, I think we have to look at Sirius Island and what was going on in the early areas of that story to get where I'm going to, like, really present this whole aspect from 100 Years Quest when I get to it. Let me just give you, again, some context. So, because Mess' alteration of people's memories within the guild, no one really knew anything about him. He just said, oh, I was Mr. Gun's disciple. He picked a very mysterious role, as well as just keeping himself very, very cautiously who he picks to go to the island with. Because he picks Wendy. Now, that's important because people like Wendy, Lucy, Gajo, Juliet, new people, or even Lisana, who had been away for 2 years, there being new faces in the guild they hadn't known yet wasn't something new. Like, Lucy had been in the guild for 6 months up until that point, and not long prior, she had just found out of guild arts, because you got all the way up to, like, chapter, I think it was, past, I think it was, like, what, 165? I think it was, like, 165 that guild arts showed back up, 164, I can't remember the exact number, but because of Mess' memory alteration of Fairy Tail members, because of Mess' memory alteration of members of the Fairy Tail Guild, there were people that didn't have any recollection of who he was or, how long he had been in the guild. It was just like a very fuzzy thought to try and recall. Now, this is important because what he did when choosing Wendy is he went for somebody that was new to the guilds. People like Wendy, Gajil, Lucy, Juvia, or even Lisana, who had been away for 2 years. Them seeing new faces within the guild wasn't something that was out of the ordinary. It was like, oh, just, there's just many faces yet to kind of get. And one of the good examples of this is prior to Guild Arts' debut into the series, everybody in the guild otherwise had really known him except for the new people. Like, Lucy hadn't even heard of him yet, but you could go into chapter 1 and say, hey, Natsu, can you tell me about Guild Arts? He knows about him. It's just something that we hadn't gotten to yet in the story. We had gotten hints of him, but obviously, like, we hadn't gotten a lot of information of him even early. We had only had, like, small name drops of him up until, like, his full debut. But it's the fact that you had people way more core into the guild not know him that was a red flag. Now, somebody like Gray or Urza not knowing who Mest was is weird. That's one of the things you have to think about. And I thought it was really well done in the anime because they did a good chunk extra of showing like smaller side characters and really giving you more opportunity to know the lesser members of the guild. And so when you got to Mest, it was just like, oh, just a new face. Like, it was really weird though that we hadn't seen this guy up until this point. And the whole stuff with claiming he was Mystican's disciple, not and whatnot, was already very weird. But you have to keep in mind, Urza and Gray not knowing anything about Mess, not even knowing his name or knowing anything about like how long he's been in the guild, what did he do at previous attempts in the S-class promotional exam and whatnot, is odd because they see members of the guild as their family. And there's I'm sure everyone can understand the difference of like a new person at work, versus a new member of your family. They're both obviously something you gotta learn, but like a new member of your family just clicks in your head way easier than just like a new coworker. It's just something that way more brands into your brain. So them not knowing anything about Mest was weird. Why is this important for Makarov though? Simple. During a flashback to chapter 40 of 100 Years Quest, we had this character Wraith, who used to actually be a member of Fairy Tail, but during a timeout, he was attacked by monsters, badly hurt, and he was dying. They was beyond saving. And he noted that Makarov, knowing his name, was surprising because they weren't very close. But Makarov said, why wouldn't I know your name? We're in the same guild. We're friends. We're family around here. And so I've always believed that Hades... Oh, I gotta move my cursor. I've always believed that him seeing this aspect to him... I said Hades, but Preach at the time. Him seeing this aspect and side of Makarov really showed not only his care for anybody in the guild, but also the fact him knowing their names and whatnot had just, again, that very core family aspect of the guild itself. And Makarov, not only here, but obviously other times I've mentioned, has shown that. He has always shown a very strong spirited connection to the guild itself. To me, I believe that this, again, displayed the perfect opportunity to pick Makarov and exactly why he would be a good candidate. And again, we saw all these other areas all like nicely crafted together for him. But now I want to get into the summary. I want to get into the bigger meat of Makarov's individual character. So the Dreyar family, through its entire bloodline, has had a really shaky existence, not only in their own personal life, but within the guild. And they had their own problems. But Makarov has, I think, had the most of his whole family. Because not only, like, you have Laxus and Laxus' problems, or you have, I can't say anything about Ivan, but you have Yuri and his problems, but Makarov is adjacent to all of them. Yuri is his father. Ivan was his son. Laxus was his grandson. He has direct connection to all of these, as well as his own struggles and his own problems. So, this guy who was born within the guild, who knew the style of the guild, he knew the spirit and the teachings, the belief, and the culture of being a member of Fairy Tail, but he didn't know really the same level of experience at having his own family. He never knew his parents. His own son he failed with. He almost failed with Laxus. And you really can see a lot of that in both how he copes with it within the guild, but also how much like he's just had to struggle through and somehow just hasn't broken. But you see a really good couple of examples of this. One is during Sirius Island, when he went to go save Natsu against Zenkro, grabbing Zenkro and like gripping onto him. Zenkro just kind of engulfs himself in his own flames and says like, hey, your options are to let me go or let me go and burn this dude alive or lose your hand. And to Zenkro, it was probably a very easy solution, like saving yourself over saving somebody in your guild. But Makarov grips tighter, and he says, don't underestimate the power of family. Now, that is important because of the context of Makarov. To Makarov, what Zenkro had told him, what he just said to him, essentially, would be, valuing himself over a child, like somebody that Makarov views as one of his children, somebody of his guild, a member of his family. And You got to look at like the extent that a parent will go through in order to keep one of their children safe. And that to me, I've always seen as just a good, strong example of Makarov's willingness to sacrifice himself for the guild. Makarov has always gone out of his way that if stuff is getting dangerous, like the threat level's getting big and heavy, he's ready to die to protect the members of the guild, to save their future and to give them a chance to live on. The largest aspect of all to this, and I think a full summary of understanding Makarov's mentality and the culmination of his life, to the extent of like his actions all and beliefs all beautifully like meld in with his pain and suffering as well, was right when he thought he was going to die. December 16th, X784. Acnologia descends upon Sirius Island, a being whose presence is associated with the apocalypse within the fairy tale world. Makarov understood this level of danger. With Josei, I'm sure he knew that he was more powerful than from the start. With Hades, I'm sure he wasn't really sure how much stronger Hades was than him, but he likely thought it was possible. Like, obviously, he believed that he could get them to leave before he knew who Hades was. But with Acnologia, he knows who he was. Like, he knew who he was. He knows what this level of threat presented in front of the guilds really kind of leveled out to. It wasn't something that could be negotiated with. It wasn't something that he could try and figure out a trick in order to get it to go away. Like Acnologia, he's somebody that, like, when he shows up, he's gonna do whatever he wants. He's gonna be going until he decides to leave, whether he destroys his targets or what. But the family that Makarov had valued so strongly, something he had known since birth, the only family he had only really had like solid success with, was in danger. Makarov is always ready to die for his children, to sacrifice himself against an enemy he didn't have time to understand why he was there, to understand why he was doing what he was doing. What he really saw was just a being that could wipe out the future for the members of his guild, and he wanted to prevent that from happening. During this event, Makarov did what he likely only believed he could do, and what I would consider the most impactful moment of his entire presence within the story. Now, Makarov had multiple opportunities to die within the series, and the one in Alvarez is very controversial. I'm still kind of in a weird position on that one, but on Sirius Island, it would have been perfect when you look at it in a spot for him to die, but it wasn't supposed to be a spot for him to die. It never was when you really look at the scene and how the story of both he and the guild is structured. When he uses giant magic and grabs on Acnologia, trying to hold him back so the members of the guild can leave, they want to help him. They don't want to leave him to die, but he's yelling at them, telling him to listen to their guild master in his final moments, knowing that to him, this is the end. This is it. And when he's finally able to bark orders them enough, just snap at them until they listen and leave, Acnologia topples him over and starts driving his claws into his chest. While Makarov is just groaning in pain, it slowly turns into laughter, with a smile on his face, because he was happy. In his words, I finally acted like a father. I now have no regrets. Makarov has so much just in that one panel that tells you about his character. So much about his past, his own mistakes, his own problems, and what he had been trying to do really to make up for that. Though he couldn't, to him, have a successful home life, the guild was what he had. The guild was what was always there for him. The guild what was always good to him. So keep that in mind, that the idea of the guild, though, to have them always there, was something that Makarov had. He never had a stable family, but he always had the guild. This is a guy who just wanted to do the best he could for those that made him happy, to those that gave him a larger sense of joy in life to make up for the pain that he had. And when I mentioned that it was a perfect time for Makarov to die. You really have to look at the context of the scenes and why it wasn't set up for him to die. It wasn't his time, and it wasn't something that was really even constructed to really lay out a death scene. It was more of the guilt. And for Makarov, who never had, again, a stable personal life, he never had like a strong life at home, he only ever had the guild. And he wanted to make sure the guild and those that he was building a happier life for would have that opportunity, because the guild was what Makarov had. A guy who didn't have parents growing up, a guy who failed with his own son, a guy whose grandson had, unfortunately for a while, go down a much darker pathway, and he wasn't sure after excommunicating if he was ever going to see him again. But when the members of the guild came back, they wanted to save him. They wanted to make sure that they could bring back their grandfather and bring back their guild master. Bring him back to the guild. Have that same idea of what the guild is for. A place to call home. Somewhere to always know that there is a place to return to with people that care about you. And it may have been, again, a perfect scene for Makarov to die, but that's not what it was for. It was to show that though Makarov hadn't had this stable home life, he successfully did great when it came to upholding the beliefs and the culture within the guild itself. That these people weren't willing to leave him to die, even if it was for their own safety that they had to risk. Makarov was able to forge the family, though not by blood, but by bonds that Mavis had made Fairy Tale for. The difference between Makarov and Hades up to that point wasn't really just their outlooks on magic, but how they treated members of their guilds. Makarov, again, was able to create this guild that would do anything for him, just like he would do anything for them, because of the fact that he treated them like family. And Hades only had like an echo of himself at that point. The only person he seemed to really care about in his guild was Ultir. But Makarov's values and dedication to the guild, to its members, molded them into that same idea of the will to face the end for their family, the will to fight back against danger that presents itself to those that they care about. Makarov himself is a very interesting character when you get down to his own life, and how tragic it is, and how painful it must have been for him for all those decades. But the guild that he had to keep him happy and keep him going both benefited him, but also benefited those that he brought in, to give them that same opportunity to have something to help them that he had growing up. Something to, again, a center place for them to call home. Somewhere to always go back to. To know that regardless of what quest you're on, what dangers you're in, what happens, you fail a quest, you succeed, it goes crazy or not, whatnot, or you end up just having a bad day. There's always somewhere that you can go where there's people that will be happy to see you. And Fairy Tale, they'll get rowdy, they'll get in brawls and whatnot and cause havoc. But at the end of the day, they'll go out of their way for each other. They've always got each other's backs, and they're always ready to do what they can for anybody in their guild, whether they're brand new or somebody that it isn't really even much of a member to the eyes of like most people in the guild. Like you have somebody that's just barely present, but they've got the guild mark. There's somebody they've accepted within their guild. They are family to them, and they will do whatever they can for them. So comment below on your thoughts about this, on if I've maybe either elevated your opinions on Makarov or whatnot, or anything that you wanted to add. Thumbs up the video, but friend the like button, subscribe button, and check out my other videos. Further than that, I appreciate everybody's already subscribed, and thank you all for listening. Bye.